Well, Paul Waldie is the Europe correspondent for the Globe and Mail. He joins me from London. Paul Waldie, first of all, thanks for taking time to speak with me. And let's start there. Why has Theresa May decided to postpone the Brexit vote that had been scheduled for tomorrow? What's been happening there?
Well, in very basic terms, she realized that there was no support for her agreement. In fact, the strongest opposition to it has come from her own Conservative Party caucus. Just about 150 or so Tory MPs have come out against the deal. So it was pretty clear this was not going to pass, given that the Conservatives already were operating within a minority position in the House of Commons. So she really had no other option.
What are the big sticking points in the Brexit deal she negotiated with the European Union? What's not working?
Well, the main sticking point, certainly for her own backbenchers, is what's known as the backstop. Now, much of this deal concerns how the UK will leave the European Union on March 29th. And within that agreement, which is known as the withdrawal agreement, there are a whole bunch of provisions for a transition period, for which things the EU will or the UK will continue to belong to, payments to the EU that it will have to make as it leaves. But one of the key provisions is that as the UK and the EU continue talking towards a larger agreement, a trade agreement, if you will, covering a whole bunch of different things, if they can't reach a deal within about 3 years, what's known as a backstop will kick in. It's basically an insurance policy that the EU has really demanded, and it would ensure that the UK would remain within a customs arrangement with the EU while those negotiations continued. More importantly, it would tie Northern Ireland closer to the EU in order to prevent any kind of a hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. And the big problem for a lot of Conservative Party backbenchers is that agreement, that Northern Ireland backstop, as it's called, has no time limit on it. In other words, it could go on forever if the negotiations went on forever. And the UK cannot unilaterally withdraw from that. They have to get consent from the EU. So those two things have really irked a lot of Tory MPs, particularly Tory MPs that want a so-called hard Brexit, which is basically cutting all ties with the EU altogether and negotiating a Canada-style deal.
So Theresa May says she's going to go back and speak with EU leaders later this week, looking for some kind of lifeline, I guess it is. How eager will they be to help her try and reach an agreement when they've been pretty clear that this is the final deal, and they do expect Britain to feel the pain from Brexit, and that seems to be what's happening?
Yeah, I can't see how they're going to go for any kind of change to this agreement. They made it very clear, even today, Donald Tusk, who's the president of the the EU Council, I should say, which basically represents all EU leaders, he just issued a tweet a couple hours ago saying, we're not going to renegotiate the deal. We'll talk about how to make it more palatable, how to maybe sign some letters with some colorful language that will help Theresa May with her opposition. But the EU's made it pretty clear they're not going to bend over backwards for Theresa May. They want this backstop. They want the Northern Ireland guarantees because they don't want a hard border with Ireland. And neither does the UK, to be fair. It's just how they get to that point that's caused Theresa May so many headaches, simply because a lot of her hard Brexit MPs just don't want Northern Ireland to be treated any differently from any other part of the UK. And they argue that that's exactly what this does. And even worse, they say, it would keep the UK bound to this agreement forever, and the UK could never get out of it. So those are the two things she's going to try and address with the EU, but I don't see how she can do that without reopening the agreement, which the EU has today said is impossible.
Right. And let's just complicate things a little further, perhaps. So we have a ruling today from European Union's top court that says Britain can legally change its mind on Brexit. It could unilaterally decide to revoke the Brexit decision as long as no Brexit agreement is in place. And we know there's no agreement yet. So, could we see another referendum on Brexit and maybe a reversal of the leave vote?
Well, there's a whole bunch of different options if this deal doesn't get approved by Parliament. And now Theresa May is going to come back with something in the next few weeks that MPs are going to vote on. And if they vote it down, which again is still likely to happen, that opens up a wide range of things, everything from another referendum, an election, Theresa May resigning or being forced out, or the UK just simply revoking this whole process and staying in the EU. Everything is really open for discussion at that point. This ruling you mentioned from the European Court of Justice has kind of been a sidelight for a while. It's been going on for a few months, but because it came out today, it's kind of once again reignited this whole discussion about whether or not the UK should simply just drop this whole process altogether and stay in the EU. And that's what the court has said it can do. It has the legal ability to simply say, we're going to stop this exit process and stay in the EU.
How likely is that, though?
Well, I mean, it's certainly Theresa May and the Conservatives, and certainly the Conservatives, the hard Brexit Conservative backbenchers would definitely not want to see that happen. And Theresa May has been adamant that the UK will leave the EU on March 29th, 2019, as planned. That the referendum in 2016 made it clear the country wants to leave the EU. So it's pretty unlikely that the Conservatives would stay, would reverse this process. Now, if there was an election and the Labour Party won and got into power, it's not even clear that they would want to pull out of the process as well, because they've made it clear that they too want to leave the EU. They just want to leave it on different terms. So it's unlikely Britain is going to decide not to leave the EU.
So the clock's kind of ticking here. When you mentioned possibly in the next couple of weeks, do we any firmer idea of when Theresa May will finally test the British Parliament? Brexit's supposed to happen March 29th, and as I say, that clock is ticking. So what do we watch for?
Oh, I mean, who knows? I mean, at this point, there was supposed to be a deadline of January 21st when the government would have to come back with something now that they pulled this agreement from Parliament. But that's even unclear. There's some suggestion now from the House of Commons that no, in fact, the government can wait until March 28th if they want to. That's unlikely. Theresa May did sort of hint that January 21st was a deadline for her. Whether they do or not, it's really up to the government to decide what to do. And even when they do that, when they come back to Parliament with something, one of the many votes that the government lost just last week was MPs now have the ability to amend that. So if she comes back with a deal, MPs from other parties can say, well, we're going to put an amendment in which says basically that deal's out the window. We want to do this. And if they get enough support for that, that's what will happen. So part of the process has been taken out of Theresa May's hands once she returns to Parliament. So it's a real tough call for her when to bring this back. But the betting right now is that it's got to be within the next month or so. Otherwise, as you say, they are running out of time, and she's made it clear she doesn't want to extend the process beyond March 29th.
All right, lots to watch for as the Brexit process continues in some form in the United Kingdom. Paul Waldie, appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.